Cole Deaver woke up before the sun did. That was nothing new. He had been doing it for 15 years, ever since he opened the Ember Plate on the edge of Creston's Edge colony. Most people on Velhari Prime didn't wake up that early. Most people on Velhari Prime also didn't care as much about food as Cole did. Those two things were probably connected. Creston's Edge was a frontier settlement built on the border of the shared world of Velhari Prime, a planet that humans and several non-human species had been living on side by side since the Accord of the Five Realms was signed decades ago. It wasn't always easy. Humans and non-humans shared roads and markets and sometimes the same water source. But there was always a certain distance between them, a careful, polite kind of distance. Most humans on the colony watched their words around non-humans. They smiled too wide or talked too carefully, trying not to say the wrong thing. Cole didn't really do any of that, not because he was rude. He just didn't think about it that much. People were people. If they wanted food, he'd feed them. If they wanted to learn, he'd teach them. Everything else was just noise. The Ember Plate was not a big restaurant. It had 12 tables, a small open kitchen, and a wooden sign outside that had been knocked crooked by a windstorm 2 years ago and never fixed. But it was always full. Always. Because Cole cooked the way his grandmother had taught him back in rural Tennessee. With patience, with attention, and with a complete refusal to rush anything that deserved time. He sourced local Velhari ingredients, the strange purple root vegetables and the smoky red grains that grew near the colony's eastern fields, and he worked them into dishes that felt familiar and new. At the same time, people said the food at the Ember Plate tasted like being home, even when they had never been to the place that inspired it. Cole had one employee, a young man named Aaron Lyle from New Mexico, sharp-eyed and quick with a joke, who had shown up looking for work 3 years ago and never left. Aaron handled the front of house, helped with prep, and pretended not to notice when Cole ate cold leftovers standing at the counter at midnight. They worked well together. They didn't talk too much or too little. It was a good arrangement. That particular afternoon, Cole was in the kitchen doing prep for dinner service when the back door opened. He didn't hear a knock. The door just opened, which was unusual because the back door led into a small alley that most people didn't know about. He looked up from the cutting board and saw a young woman standing in the doorway. She was not human. She was tall, taller than most people Cole knew, and there were faint scales along her jawline and down her forearms, catching the kitchen light with a faint iridescent shimmer. Her eyes were amber, with vertical pupils that widened slightly as they adjusted to the brightness of the kitchen. She was dressed simply, in plain clothes that somehow still looked expensive in the way that well-made things always do. She stood very still, the way that certain animals stand still, not from fear, but from control. Cole looked at her. She looked at him. "You came in the back," he said. "The front was busy," she said. Her voice was careful and precise, like someone who had learned the common tongue from a book, rather than from conversation. "The front has one table of 2 people and a cat that doesn't belong to anyone," Cole said. She considered this. The alley was quieter. Cole nodded, because that was actually a fair point. He put down his knife and wiped his hands on his apron. "Can I help you?" She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I want to learn how to cook." Cole had heard stranger requests. Once a man had come in asking if Cole could teach him to make a dish his late wife used to make, using only a description and no recipe. Cole had spent 2 weeks on it until he got it right. Compared to that, a young woman wanting to learn cooking was not unusual at all. "Have you ever cooked before?" he asked. "No," she said. "Have you ever held a knife before?" "Not for this purpose," she said, which was a strange answer, but Cole let it go. He pulled an apron off the hook near the door and held it out to her. "What's your name?" "Vailindra," she said. "Cole," he said. "Put that on. We'll start with the basics." She looked at the apron for a moment, as if she wasn't entirely sure what to do with it. Then she put it on, tying it with more precision than most people managed on their first try, and she stepped fully into the kitchen. The first lesson was simple. Cole showed her how to hold a chef's knife, fingers curled, thumb and index finger gripping the blade at the bolster, knuckles acting as a guide. She listened with total focus. She didn't ask why. She just watched his hands and then tried to replicate what she saw. Her grip was wrong. He adjusted it. She tried again. Still a little wrong. He adjusted again. She tried a third time and got it mostly right. "Better," he said. "Now just cut the carrots, slow and even." The first cut was too hard. The carrot flew off the board and hit the wall. Cole picked it up. "Less force. You're not fighting it. You're guiding through it." She tried again. This time the carrots stayed on the board, but the cut was uneven. "That's fine," he said. "Keep going." Slowly, the cuts became more even. Then he had her start a broth. Boil water, add aromatics, let it build. Simple enough. She watched the pot with great focus, then decided to help things along by turning the heat up very high. Within 2 minutes, the broth was a rolling disaster. Half the water gone, the aromatics scorched at the bottom of the pot. Cole turned the heat off. He looked at the ruined pot. Then he looked at her. "You can't rush a broth," he said. "Low heat, time. That's it. That's the whole thing." Vailindra looked at the ruined pot for a moment. Then, very quietly, she laughed. It was a real laugh, not polite or performed. It came out of her like something that had been waiting for a long time to find a way out. It changed her face completely. She looked younger. She looked lighter. Cole looked at her and felt something he couldn't quite name. Not pity, not surprise. Something more like recognition. Like he was looking at someone who didn't laugh nearly enough and had just remembered how. He threw the ruined broth in the sink and handed her a clean pot. "Again," he said. "This time don't touch the dial." She took the pot and she started again. Outside the sun was going down over Valhari Prime, painting the colony streets in long gold light. The dinner crowd was starting to wander toward the front entrance. Aaron was setting tables and pretending he hadn't heard the whole thing through the pass-through window. Cole was already moving on to the next task, pulling ingredients from the cold storage, talking through the process without slowing down. And Vailindra stood at the stove, holding a new pot with her knife-grip hands, and paid attention to every single word. She came back the next morning. Cole hadn't told her to come back in the morning specifically. He had just said, tomorrow, and she had taken that to mean sunrise. She was standing at the back door when he arrived at 4:15 to begin prep, already wearing the apron she had left on the hook the night before, hands folded in front of her like a student waiting for class to begin. Cole unlocked the door, looked at her, and said nothing except, "There's coffee on the counter. Don't touch the stove until I tell you." That was how the weeks began. Vailindra came every day, sometimes in the morning, sometimes in the afternoon, occasionally slipping in just before the dinner rush, when Cole needed another pair of hands, and she had become good enough to actually be useful, rather than a hazard. She was quiet by nature, which Cole respected. She didn't fill silence with words for the sake of it. She asked questions only when she genuinely didn't understand something, and when Cole answered, she remembered the answer permanently. He never had to tell her the same thing twice. That, more than anything else, was what made her a good student. The lessons built on each other slowly, the way a good meal builds, one layer at a time. Cole started with the Maillard reaction. He put 2 pieces of Valhari root meat in front of her, one raw, one properly seared, and told her to smell them. She did. He asked her what was different. She said the cooked one smelled more complex, like it had more going on beneath the surface. He nodded. He told her that was chemistry, that when protein and sugar in meat hit high heat, real heat, consistent heat. They transformed into hundreds of new flavor compounds that didn't exist in the raw ingredient. He told her that was why searing mattered, why you had to get the pan truly hot before the meat touched it, and why you never crowded the pan or moved the meat too early. You give it time, he said, and the heat does the work. You rush it, you just get gray and sad. Vaylindra stared at the seared piece of meat. So the flavor is not added, she said slowly. It is released. Or created, Cole said. Both, depending on what you're working with. She thought about that for a long time. Cole could tell she was turning it over in her mind, the way someone turns over a concept that changes how they see a lot of other things. Next he taught her salt, not just how much, but why. He made her taste a bowl of plain broth, then add a small pinch of salt, and taste it again. She frowned at the second taste. She said it didn't taste saltier, just more like itself. Cole smiled for the first time in a while. That, he told her, was exactly right. Salt didn't overwrite flavor. It opened it up. It told the other ingredients to speak louder. It was not a seasoning so much as a key. Vaylindra was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "In my culture, we don't season things. We consume what the ingredient already is." It was the first time she had mentioned her culture directly. Cole didn't push. He just nodded and said, "That works too. But this is different. This is about conversation." She tilted her head slightly. Conversation. Between the ingredients, he said, nothing in a dish should shout over everything else. You want them talking to each other. Sweet talks to bitter. Acid talks to fat. Texture talks to softness. The job of the cook is to make sure everyone at the table gets heard. She looked at him with an expression he was starting to recognize. The one where something he said lined up with something she already understood from a completely different direction. "That is how you hold a court," she said quietly, almost to herself. Cole didn't know what that meant. He handed her a lemon and told her to juice it into the sauce. By the third week, Vaylindra could build a broth from scratch, break down a whole fish without wasting anything, and make a pan sauce that actually had layers of flavor, rather than just being hot liquid. Her knife work was still a little stiff, but it was getting better every day. Cole was a demanding teacher. Not cruel, but exact. He didn't pretend a mistake was fine if it wasn't, but he also never made her feel stupid for making one. He just showed her the right way again, and moved on. What Cole noticed, and filed away without comment, was the way she ate. The first time he had put a finished dish in front of her for tasting purposes, she had approached it the way someone approaches something they expect to be unpleasant, cautious, prepared. Her species, she had told him once, ate things that were flame-charred or raw. The idea of food that had been carefully built, layered, coaxed into something more than the sum of its parts, that was genuinely foreign to her. He had made her a simple bowl of stew one evening, slow-cooked for 6 hours, Velhari root vegetables, a rich broth thickened with ground red grain, a small piece of braised meat that had been falling apart for the last hour. Nothing fancy, just the kind of food Cole made when he wanted to feed someone, not impress them. She had taken the first spoonful carefully, then stopped, then took another one. She didn't say anything for a long time. Cole just picked up his own bowl and ate beside her, and didn't make it a moment. He didn't ask how it was. He didn't watch her. He just ate his food and looked out the small window above the sink at the Velhari Prime evening sky, which turned a deep, bruised violet at this hour, that he still wasn't used to after 3 years on this planet. When her bowl was empty, he reached over and refilled it, without asking. She let him. Aaron watched all of this from the front of the restaurant, and said nothing, which was unusual for him, because Aaron usually had something to say about everything. But even Aaron, who made a habit of turning everything into a joke, seemed to understand that whatever was happening in the kitchen at that hour was not the kind of thing you commented on. He did, however, start paying closer attention to Valindra when she left. There was never anyone waiting for her. She walked out of the alley and simply disappeared around the corner. And when Aaron, out of curiosity, had once gone to the window to watch, she was already gone. Not far down the street. Just gone. He also noticed that when she passed through the market on the morning she arrived early, the vendors went quiet. Not the normal quiet of people distracted by their work. A different kind of quiet. The kind that had awareness in it. And he noticed the Valhari coins she left as payment. Old ones, the kind that hadn't been in common circulation for at least 40 years, each one worth 10 times what the lesson should have cost. And he noticed the tall, armored figure that stood across the road some evenings, watching the front of the ember plate, and then was gone the next time you looked. Aaron was not someone who panicked, but he was someone who paid attention. And everything he was paying attention to was pointing somewhere he wasn't sure Cole was going to like. He just hadn't figured out yet how to bring it up. Aaron found Cole in the back office on a Tuesday afternoon, between the lunch service and the start of dinner prep. Cole was going through supply orders, a cup of cold coffee at his elbow that he kept almost drinking and then forgetting about. It was a small, cluttered office. Just a desk, 2 chairs, a shelf of old cookbooks with broken spines, and a window that looked into the alley. Aaron came in, closed the door, and put his datapad flat on the desk in front of Cole. Cole looked at it. Then he looked at Aaron. Aaron had the expression of someone who had rehearsed what he was going to say several times and was still not confident about how to begin. "What is this?" Cole asked. "Just look at it," Aaron said. Cole picked up the pad. The screen showed a profile page pulled from the Accord Council's Public Diplomatic Registry, a database that most civilians never had reason to use. At the top of the page was a name, Valindra Drathkai. Below it was a photo, clearly taken from a distance, without her knowledge, that was unmistakably the same young woman who had been burning pans in Cole's kitchen for the past several weeks. Cole read the page. He didn't read fast, but he read carefully, the way he did everything. He went through the whole thing. Title of the subject, High Heir of the Drath Realm. Father, Sovereign Drathkai the Elder. Territory under sovereign rule. 11 star systems across the outer Valhari belt. 4 subject species, a governing council of 43, and a military fleet estimated at somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 warships. Political status, one of the 5 most powerful non-human ruling entities currently recognized by the Accord Council. Cole set the pad down. He picked up his cold coffee. He took a sip and made a face because it was cold. "Okay," he said. Aaron stared at him. "Okay? Okay," Cole said again. "Cole, she is the heir to an 11-system empire," Aaron said. "Her father has warships. Actual warships, a lot of them, and she's been standing in our kitchen every day for a month, getting broth lessons." "Her knife grip is still not right," Cole said. "The right hand is better, but she keeps letting the left drift. I'm fixing it tomorrow." Aaron sat down heavily in the second chair. He put his face in his hands. He stayed like that for a moment. Then he looked up. "You're not going to do anything differently, are you?" "She's a good student," Cole said. "She works hard. She asks smart questions. What am I supposed to do? Send her home because her father has warships?" "Most people would at least be a little alarmed," Aaron said. "I'm a little alarmed about my dried Valhari root shipment being 2 days late," Cole said. "That's going to affect the Tuesday stew. This," he tapped the pad, "doesn't change my Tuesday stew." Aaron looked at him for a long time. Then he shook his head and stood up. "You know what? I'm almost impressed. A normal person would at least sweat a little." "I'm sweating about the shipment," Cole said. He handed Aaron back the pad and picked up his supply orders again. "Go make sure the afternoon delivery is all accounted for. And stop snooping in diplomatic registries." Aaron left, and Cole sat in the small office alone for a moment. He looked at the wall. Somewhere behind the wall, Out in the kitchen, tomorrow's broth stock was already simmering on the low burner, the one he trusted to hold temperature overnight. He could hear it from here, a faint steady sound, like the building itself was breathing. He thought about Vailindra, not about the registry page, not about warships or 11-star systems. He thought about her at the stove 3 weeks ago, laughing at herself when she scorched the broth. He thought about the way she had gotten quieter and more focused with each passing week. Not quieter because she was withdrawing, but quieter the way good cooks get quiet when they're concentrating, when the work takes over and the noise in the brain goes down. He thought about the look on her face the first time the stew was right. Then he went back to the supply orders. What Cole didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that Vailindra had thought about all of this far more than he had. She had made the decision to come to Creston's Edge specifically, carefully, after years of moving through her father's realm, feeling like she was behind glass. Everything in the Drath realm was performance and protocol. Every meal was a ceremony. Every interaction carried weight. She had grown up, surrounded by people who were always calculating. Calculating what to say, what to show, what to want, based entirely on who she was and what her father controlled. She had been on Velhari Prime for 2 months before she found the Ember Plate. She had walked through the colony market on a cold morning, dressed simply, trying to be no one in particular. And she had smelled something cooking from the direction of a side street. Something warm and layered and completely unfamiliar. She had followed the smell without thinking, the way you follow something that calls to a part of you that usually doesn't get to speak. She had stood in the alley behind the restaurant for a long time before she knocked, or rather, before she simply opened the door, because knocking had felt like asking permission from someone who didn't know yet that they were going to say yes. Some recognition of who she was, or at least some performance of over-politeness. She had expected the careful distance that most humans in the colony showed non-humans, amplified by whatever instinct people had around her, even when they didn't know her name. Instead, a human man in a stained apron had looked at her and asked if she had ever held a knife. She had thought about that moment almost every day since. She had been to courts on 4 different planets. She had been addressed by ambassadors and generals and scholars. She had been given gifts and honors and formal recognition by species who had spent weeks preparing the right words. None of it had felt like anything real. Cole had handed her an apron. It was the most honest thing anyone had done for her in years. She knew, of course, that Aaron had been looking into her background. She had noticed the change in the way he watched her, not afraid, but carefully attentive. She was not worried about it. What worried her, in the small, quiet way things worry you when you don't want to admit it, was what would happen when her father found out. Not if, when. Her father found out everything eventually. It was one of the things about being the child of someone who governed 11 systems. The information always came back. And when it did, things changed. They always changed. The careful, ordinary, genuinely good things she had found always changed when her father's shadow fell across it. She stood at the stove that evening and watched the reduction slowly thicken the way Cole had shown her, and she told herself not to think about it yet. There was still tomorrow's lesson. She was still getting the left hand wrong on the knife. She focused on the reduction, and let tomorrow be tomorrow. It happened on a Thursday evening, which was always the Ember Plate's busiest night. Every table was full. The kitchen was running at full speed, 3 dishes firing at once, the pass cluttered with plates waiting to go out, the air smelling of the reduction Cole had been working since that morning, and the sharp, clean scent of fresh Velhari herbs he'd gotten from the market at dawn. Aaron was moving between the front and the pass, calling orders, refilling glasses, managing the particular kind of controlled chaos that a full dinner service always became. Vailindra was at the prep station near the back, working through a batch of braised root vegetables that would be plated as a side during the second half of service. She had been quiet all evening. Not unusual for her, but a different kind of quiet than normal. Cole had noticed it, but hadn't said anything. He had learned that she would say things when she was ready to say them, and not before. Then the front door opened. Aaron was the first to see it happen. He said later that the room didn't go loud and then quiet. It just went quiet all at once, like someone had turned the dial. The guests at the tables near the door stopped talking first, and then the ones further back stopped, one table at a time, until the entire restaurant was holding its breath without knowing why. 6 figures came through the door. They were armored, not in the decorative way of ceremonial guards, but in the real working way of soldiers who were actually prepared to do something if it became necessary. They were large. They moved without sound in a way that should not have been possible for their size. They spread to either side of the entrance and stood still. And everything about the way they stood communicated something very clearly without any of them having to say a word. And then the sovereign came in. Drathkai the Elder was not what most people expected when they imagined an ancient ruler. He was not stooped or withered by age. He filled the doorway completely, not with excess, but with the particular presence of something that had taken a long time to become what it was. He was very tall, taller than Vailindra, with scales that were deeper in color, almost black at the edges, with a dark iridescent shimmer that caught the restaurant's warm lighting in a way that made him seem like he was slightly more real than everything around him. His eyes were the same amber as his daughter's, but colder, older, the eyes of something that had been watching the world for a very long time, and had largely seen it all. He stood in the entrance of the Ember Plate and looked around the room slowly. Every person in that restaurant was perfectly still. Vailindra, at the prep station in the back, had gone completely motionless. Cole came out of the kitchen because there was a pause in the orders, and he wanted to check on the pass. He came through the kitchen door, wiping his hands on his apron, and looked at the dining room, and understood immediately that something unusual was happening. He looked at the 6 guards. He looked at the sovereign. He looked at Vailindra, who was looking at the sovereign with an expression that was not fear exactly, but something close to it. Cole looked back at the sovereign. The sovereign looked at Cole. His voice was low and even, and had a texture to it, like gravel at the bottom of a very deep river. "I am," Cole said. "I would speak with you," the sovereign said. Cole nodded. He turned back to the kitchen pass and called to Aaron to hold the next 2 tickets. Then turned back and gestured to a corner table, the one near the window that he privately considered the best seat in the room because it was away from the kitchen noise and got the last of the evening light. The sovereign looked at the table. Then he crossed the room and sat down, and his 6 guards arranged themselves in the kind of configuration that suggested they had done this in many different rooms on many different worlds. Every single person in the restaurant was trying very hard to look like they were not staring. Cole pulled out the chair across from the sovereign and sat down. He put his hands flat on the table and waited. The sovereign studied him the way you study something you have not decided about yet. "My daughter has been coming to this place," he said. "She has," Cole said. "She has been learning from you." "Yes." "Why did you take her on?" the sovereign asked. There was no hostility in the question. It was simply direct. "She asked," Cole said, "and she was willing to work. Those are the 2 things I need." The sovereign was quiet for a moment. "You did not know who she was when you agreed?" "No," Cole said. "And now that you know?" Cole thought about it for a second, not because he was unsure, but because he wanted to give an honest answer rather than a quick one. "Doesn't change much," he said. "She's a good student. She's still getting one grip wrong on the knife, but she's getting there." "I don't see why any of that should change because of who her father is." The room was very quiet. Someone near the far wall had stopped breathing entirely. The sovereign looked at Cole for a long time, And Cole, to his credit, looked back, not with defiance, not with performance, just with the plain steadiness of someone who was being honest, and saw no reason not to be. "In the entirety of my reign," the sovereign said slowly, "I have never once been spoken to without the speaker calculating the cost of every word." "I'm a cook," Cole said simply, "not a diplomat." Something shifted in the sovereign's expression. It was very slight, but it was there. "They tell me you feed people well," the sovereign said. "I try," Cole said. "Feed me," the sovereign said. Cole stood up. He went back into the kitchen. Aaron was watching him through the pass-through window with an expression of pure, undisguised alarm. He went to the stove, ladled out a bowl of the slow-cooked stew, the same one he had made Valindra in the first weeks, the same one that had been simmering since morning, and he plated it simply, the way he always did, because it didn't need anything else. Good food didn't need decoration. It just needed to be itself. He brought it out and set it in front of the sovereign. The sovereign looked at the bowl. Then he looked at Cole. There was no pomp in the presentation, no ceremony, no explanation of what the dish was or what it meant. Cole just set it down the way he set anything down in front of anyone, and stepped back. The sovereign picked up the spoon. He ate slowly. No one in the restaurant moved. The guards did not move. Valindra, still at the prep station, had turned fully now, and was watching her father with an expression that Cole couldn't entirely read, but had something like hope in it. The sovereign finished the bowl. He looked at the empty bowl for a moment, and then he looked at Cole. He said nothing, but he put one hand briefly, flatly on the table, a deliberate gesture, not a dramatic one, and then stood, and his guards adjusted immediately, and he walked to the door. He stopped in the doorway and turned back. "She will continue her lessons," he said. It was not a question. "She's welcome as long as she wants to come," Cole said. The sovereign held his gaze for one more moment. Then he left. The door closed. The restaurant stayed silent for about 4 full seconds. And then Aaron, from behind the pass-through window, said in a very flat voice, "Cole, I need you to know that my heart stopped twice just now." Cole went back into the kitchen. "Fire the next 2 tickets," he said. Aaron stared at him. Then he picked up the tickets. Valindra was still standing at the prep station. She wasn't looking at Cole. She was looking at the door her father had just walked out of, with an expression that was complicated and layered and private. Cole glanced at her, then quietly slid the finished tray of braised vegetables within her reach. She looked down at it. Then she picked up her tongs and got back to work. 3 months after the sovereign walked into the ember plate and finished a bowl of stew without saying a single word about it, Valindra told Cole she was ready. He had known it was coming, not because she told him. She wasn't someone who announced things in advance, but because he could see it in the way she worked. There was a steadiness to her now that hadn't been there at the beginning. She moved through the kitchen without hesitation, without second-guessing each step. She tasted as she went, adjusted without being told, cleaned her station without being reminded. Her knife grip was finally right, on both hands. She had stopped fighting the food and started listening to it. Cole knew that shift when he saw it, because he remembered when it had happened in himself, years ago. The moment cooking stopped being something he was trying to do, and started being something he simply did. She came in early on a Saturday, earlier even than Cole, which he would not have thought was possible. When he arrived at 4 in the morning, the kitchen was already lit, and she was already there, working through her mise en place with the quiet focus of someone who had been planning this for a while. She had a full menu written out on a piece of paper and propped against the spice shelf, where she could see it, and she had already sourced most of the ingredients herself from the colony market the day before. Cole looked at the menu. He read it slowly. It was a 4-course meal. A cold salad to start, using Valhari greens and a dressing she had built from fermented red grain paste. something she had developed herself over the past few weeks, using techniques he had taught her, but in a direction that was entirely her own. A soup, not the stew he had made her, but a lighter broth-based dish, clear and delicate, with thin-sliced root vegetables arranged in it, like something you might want to look at before you ate it. A main course of slow-braised Velhari river fish, with a reduction that used an ingredient from the Drath realm. Something dark and intensely savory that she had brought from somewhere he didn't ask about, because it balanced the dish in a way nothing else would have. And a final course that was simple almost to the point of being nothing. Just a small, warm sweet, made from local grain and honey, barely sweetened, barely complicated. The kind of ending that made a meal feel complete without trying to dazzle anyone. Cole handed the menu back to her. "Okay," he said. "I'll stay out of the way unless you ask." She nodded and started cooking. Aaron arrived an hour later, took one look at the situation, silently made himself a coffee, and sat on the stool near the pass-through window without saying a word. He watched Vailindra work with the expression of someone at a recital, proud and quiet, not wanting to interrupt. Vailindra cooked for 4 hours. She didn't rush anything. She tended the broth like it was something living. She made the reduction 3 times before she was satisfied with the balance, pouring out 2 attempts that were close but not right, starting fresh each time, without frustration, without drama, just that particular calm that comes from knowing that good things don't get made by forcing them. The salad dressing she tasted 5 times, adjusting with small additions of acid, and then fat, and then a touch more salt, until it tasted like itself at full volume. The sweet she made last, and she made it slowly, standing at the stove the whole time, not walking away. At 8 in the morning, she plated all 4 courses in sequence, and set them out on the small table in the back corner of the kitchen, where Cole ate his own meals when the service was done. She stepped back. Cole sat down. Aaron pulled up the second stool. They ate together, all 4 courses, one after the other, in the quiet of the early morning kitchen, with the day just beginning to come through the small high window above the sink. Outside, Velhari Prime was waking up, the market sounds, the delivery vehicles, the particular low hum of the colony coming to life. Cole ate everything slowly. He didn't perform. He didn't narrate. He just ate and paid attention. When the last course was finished, he sat back. He looked at the empty plates for a moment. Then he said, "The dressing on the salad was sitting about 10 seconds too short before you plated it. A little more time would have let it settle fully. The broth was very good. That was the best thing on the table. The reduction was right, but you pulled it about half a minute early. You'll know it next time. The sweet was exactly what it should be. Don't change it." Vailindra listened to all of it. She nodded once at each point. The rest, Cole said, was excellent. She was quiet for a moment. Then she asked, "Am I done?" Cole looked at her. "What do you mean, done?" "Am I a cook now?" she said. "Is that what this means?" Cole thought about the question. He gave it the time it deserved. "You were a cook 3 weeks ago," he said. "Today you know you are." Something in her face shifted. "Just enough." "You're a good cook," he said. "A real one. Not because the food was technical. Because you made 4 courses that all had the same idea running through them. You were thinking about the person eating. The whole time you were thinking about them. That's what cooking is. Everything else is just technique." Vailindra looked at the empty plates. She didn't say anything for a while. Then she said quietly, "You are the first person in a very long time who taught me something because they simply wanted to." Cole picked up the empty plates and carried them to the sink. "You made it easy," he said. "You paid attention." She left that afternoon. Cole didn't know it was the last time. He thought she'd be back the following week. She had mentioned something about wanting to work on pastry, and he'd been mentally planning the progression. But the following week, she didn't come. She didn't come the week after that either. Cole didn't say much about it. He went back to running the ember plate the way he always had. Aaron watched him for signs of something. He wasn't sure what, and didn't see any. Cole just cooked. He kept her apron on the hook where it had always been. 2 weeks later, on a Wednesday morning, a letter arrived at the Ember Plate. It came by formal courier, a small sealed case with 2 signatures on the outside, which Aaron told Cole meant it had passed through the Accord Council's diplomatic office, which meant it was real and official, and not something you opened casually. Cole opened it anyway, standing at the prep counter with flour on his hands. The letter was on Drath Realm diplomatic paper, heavy and dark, with a seal at the top, that Aaron photographed immediately to look up later. It was addressed to the Ember Plate, Creston's Edge Colony, Velhari Prime, and it said, in the careful, precise language of official correspondence, that Sovereign Drathkai the Elder had submitted a formal petition to the Accord Council on behalf of Creston's Edge, requesting that the colony be designated a protected settlement under Drath Realm Charter. The designation, if granted, would mean that no external political body could exert pressure, claim land, or displace residents of Creston's Edge. It also meant, although the letter didn't say this directly, that no one was going to be pushing the colony around anymore. Not the expansion-minded development interests that had been quietly circling the settlement for 2 years. Not anyone. The letter did not explain why. It gave no reason. It cited no debt. It was just done. Cole read it twice. Then he set it down on the counter. Then he went back to his prep. Aaron came into the kitchen 30 seconds later, holding his phone and looking like he had run there. Cole, do you understand what this means for the colony? They've been trying to protect this settlement for years. This solves it, just like that. Because of a stew. Cole didn't look up from the cutting board. Get me the butter from the cold storage. Cole. And the fresh herbs on the second shelf. Aaron stood in the kitchen doorway. He looked at Cole. The morning light was coming through the window, the way it always did at this hour, falling across the prep counter in a long, warm stripe. Somewhere outside, the colony was going about its day. People at their work, the market open, the streets busy, everyone getting on with things. No one knowing yet that the document now sitting on the prep counter of a small frontier restaurant was going to change the shape of their lives here in ways they would understand only gradually. I'm going to write her a thank you, Cole said, and I'm going to put the stew recipe in it. Aaron put his head against the doorframe. Of course you are, he said. Cole picked up the pen he kept near the cutting board for writing down order notes, turned over the back of a supply receipt, and started writing. Outside, Velhari Prime turned slowly under its sun. The Ember Plate was already filling with the smell of the morning prep. Broth on the low burner, herbs coming to warmth in the pan, the day beginning again the way it always did. Simple, ordinary, and quietly extraordinary, in the way that only the things you do with real care ever manage to be.